Have you ever wondered who really controls the value of your money, the cost of your coffee, your mortgage rate, even your job prospects? All are shaped by decisions made by central banks. These institutions operate behind the scenes, speaking in cryptic terms and making choices that ripple through every layer of society. Central banks are the conductors of the global economic orchestra, guiding the tempo and mood of commerce without ever playing an instrument themselves. Their goal is stability, but their actions can unleash waves of unpredictable change. With a subtle flick, they can create or destroy fortunes, often beyond the reach of daily politics. But who gave them this power? And can we trust them to use it wisely? This is the story of how a handful of institutions came to hold the world's prosperity in their hands. We'll pull back the curtain on their mechanisms, the crises that forged their power, and the impact they have on your life. The story of central banking is, in many ways, the secret story of the modern world. Let's begin. Our story starts with gold, heavy, tangible, and trusted for centuries. Goldsmiths in 17th century London offered to store gold and issued paper receipts, which soon became the first form of paper money. But these goldsmiths discovered they could issue more receipts than gold held, lending out the difference and creating money from nothing. This was the birth of fractional reserve banking, a system built on trust and confidence. When panic struck, everyone rushed to claim their gold, exposing the illusion and triggering bank runs. To prevent chaos, England created the Bank of England in 1694, a private bank with public powers to lend to the government and issue banknotes. The Swedish Riksbank, even older, and other central banks soon followed, acting as lenders of last resort. These early central banks were born from crisis, not idealism, created to prevent collapse and fund governments. They learned to pull the strings of credit and confidence, shaping economies from behind the scenes. Their power was forged in the fires of panic and necessity. Central banking began as a desperate solution, not a grand vision. The legacy of those first crises still shapes our financial world. The puppeteers had taken their place. In the United States, suspicion of centralized power ran deep. Early national banks faced fierce opposition, so for decades, thousands of banks issued their own currencies, creating instability. The Panic of 1907 changed everything, a financial wildfire that nearly destroyed the economy, only stopped by J.P. Morgan's personal intervention. The crisis proved the need for a central safety net. In secret, bankers and politicians met on Jekyll Island in 1910, crafting the blueprint for a new system. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 created a decentralized network of 12 regional reserve banks overseen by a central board. This structure balanced fears of concentrated power, but gave the Fed authority to issue a single currency and regulate banks. The American economic orchestra finally had its conductor. The Fed was born from crisis, compromise, and the need for stability. Its power would soon be tested on the world stage. The baton had been passed. The era of modern central banking had begun. The 20th century pushed central banks to their limits. War, depression, and inflation tested their power. After World War II, nations gathered at Bretton Woods to build a new economic order. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency, pegged to gold, with other currencies tied to the dollar. This system brought stability and fueled decades of global growth. But the US printed more dollars than it had gold, funding wars and social programs. Other countries demanded gold for their dollars, draining US reserves. In 1971, President Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold, ending Bretton Woods. The world entered an era of floating exchange rates, where central banks gained even more power to intervene. The dollar remained king, but now its value and the fate of economies was set by markets and central bank decisions. The global financial system had changed forever. Central banks now shaped not just national, but global destinies. The age of managed money had truly arrived. The orchestra played on, but the music was different. Central bank's main tool is the interest rate, the price of money. Lowering rates makes borrowing cheaper, spurring spending and investment. Raising rates cools inflation, making loans more expensive and encouraging saving. This balancing act is the heart of monetary policy. The federal funds rate in the U.S. sets the tone for all other rates, from mortgages to credit cards. Even a tiny change can send shockwaves through global markets. Central bankers analyze mountains of data, trying to predict the future and steer the economy towards stable growth. Get it right, and prosperity follows. Get it wrong, and recession or runaway inflation can devastate millions. The stakes are enormous, and the margin for error is razor thin. The conductor's baton is always in motion. When interest rates hit zero and fear still paralyzes the economy, central banks turn to a new tool: quantitative easing, or QE. QE means creating new money digitally to buy financial assets, usually government bonds. This floods banks with cash, lowers long-term interest rates, and aims to jumpstart lending and investment. It's the economic equivalent of a defibrillator, shocking the system back to life. Central banks like the Fed, ECB, and Bank of Japan created trillions out of thin air during the 2008 crisis. Critics warn QE distorts markets, inflates asset bubbles, and widens inequality. It blurs the line between monetary policy and government finance. The biggest question: how do you withdraw all that money without causing another crash? QE is a powerful, risky experiment, one whose long-term effects are still unknown. The orchestra plays on, but the tune is more unpredictable than ever. Central bank decisions aren't just numbers, they have real human costs. Fighting inflation often means raising rates and slowing the economy, knowing jobs will be lost. In the early 1980s, Fed Chairman Paul Volcker raised rates to 20% to break runaway inflation. The result: deep recession, bankruptcies, and soaring unemployment. Volcker was vilified, but his harsh medicine worked, eventually restoring stability and growth. Central bankers make moral choices, not just economic ones. Who bears the pain? Who reaps the rewards? The Volcker shock reminds us: behind every policy are real families and real suffering. The conductor's baton shapes destinies, not just markets. The power is immense, and the burden heavy. The music of money is never without consequence. The 2008 financial crisis exposed both the power and fragility of central banks. Years of low rates fueled a housing bubble and reckless lending. When the bubble burst, panic froze the global financial system. Lehman Brothers collapsed, and the world teetered on the edge of depression. Central banks slashed rates, lent directly to banks, and unleashed quantitative easing, creating trillions to buy toxic assets and government debt. The system was saved, but at a cost. Bailouts for banks, lost homes, and jobs for millions. Public trust was shattered, fueling political anger and populism. The crisis revealed central banks as powerful players, not just neutral referees. In saving the system, they changed their relationship with the public forever. The orchestra survived, but the audience was no longer sure who the music was for. The legacy of 2008 still shapes our world. The stakes of central banking have never been higher. The next crisis may demand even more. From goldsmiths to digital money, central banks have shaped the fate of nations. Today they face new challenges: cryptocurrencies, climate change, and rising inequality. Their tools are more powerful and more experimental than ever. Central bankers are unelected technocrats, trusted with immense power for the sake of stability. But who holds them accountable? As their influence grows, the question becomes urgent: who conducts the conductors? The future of money, power, and society hangs in the balance. The score is still being written. The choices made now will echo for generations. In the end, the answer to who holds the baton may define the world we inherit.